Hi there. Thanks for tuning in. This is the Follow Your Passion podcast. I'm your host, Erwin Wils. I'm a mindset and business strategist and founder of Millionaire Life Strategy. In this podcast, I'm interviewing my clients and other entrepreneurs that are following their passion and make a good living out of it. When you want to know more about me or what I can do for you, check out my website, millionaireLifestrategy.com. But first, check out this episode of Follow Your Passion. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Follow Your Passion podcast. Let me introduce my guest of today. His name is Scott Harvey. Scott has spent 20 years as a hostage negotiator and public information officer while working as a sergeant in the police world. He began speaking professionally in 2010 using vacation from the police department. He was able to retire in 2018 after 20 years of service, and now he's a full-time speaker, author, and coach. He teaches people the tactics he learned over 20 years as a hostage negotiator, and these communication tactics translate beautiful to the business world. He just dropped his book, Silent Skills, in April, and he's been hitting the podcast circuit promoting this book because he loves helping people and organizations break the silence that is killing their abilities to succeed. So welcome, Scott. How are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well, Erwin. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. So
Good.
You've been a professional negotiator, Scott. How did you come to start doing that?
It's a great question. I got into police work to help people. That's always what I wanted to do. Thankfully, it wasn't for the money because there's really no money to be made in police work. But, I got into police work to help people. And I realized very quickly that police in general are kind of in the cleanup business. People would call us after there's a tragedy, when there's an emergency, and we would try to come and put things back together again. And it was not a ton of fun. And so I got involved in the prevention end very quickly. I was teaching DARE classes in the classroom to fifth graders and seventh graders, just helping them make better choices. And then I got involved in hostage negotiation because I realized I was fairly good at communication. And some of these people had just gotten themselves into a situation they didn't know how to get out of. And if I did my job, then the SWAT team didn't have to do their job. The hostages were safe. And the hostage taker was safe. And I just realized that there's a lot of power in the words that we use. And so that's kind of where my career started going. Not only was I doing hostage negotiation stuff, I was talking to the media. I was doing all of the press releases for the police department, just doing a lot of educating, informing, and helping people communicate more effectively while at the police department. And then that turned into this second job.
Nice. And I can only second you on the importance of language because people don't realize it a lot, what the importance of language and how you use it actually is, right?
Yeah. Today, and this is what I've told my kids, my daughters are 22 and 18. So their whole life, they've kind of grown up in this social media world. And to me, that's lowered the bar for communication in our world. And so when we would go into restaurants and stores and the people working there weren't being real communicative with us, I would tell my daughters, do you see where the bar is? It's really low. Like all you got to do is a little bit better than that person to stand out in the world today. So be a good communicator. Place your own order at 6, 7 years old in a restaurant so that you're used to talking to adults and it's not awkward. I think that those who are the most successful today are the ones who can communicate the most effectively. Even in a world where communication is easier than ever, we're not getting our message across effectively.
Yeah. And take you also into account the nonverbal language when you're teaching?
For sure. One of the things that I write about in my book and I teach people, depending upon what research you read, they're saying that about 7% of our message is in our words. The other 93% is in our tone and in our body language.
Yeah.
This is why when you text your wife or your husband or something and you say, hey, I'm not going to be home, I'm working late, and they text you back 2 words, that's fine. You don't really know what that means because if you were face to face or in a room with them, it might be, that's fine. Or it could be, that's fine. Even the tone in those on this podcast make those 2 very different responses. And in a world driven by text, by quick messages, my fear is we're missing most of the meaning behind it. So I love doing podcasts because at least you capture the tone along with the words. And you and I are on video, so we can get some of the body language as well. It's just a more complete message, and it cuts down on miscommunication.
Oh, definitely. It reminds me of a television show I saw once that there were couples. They had to guess songs, right? Well, they were sitting in two separate rooms with a wooden wall in between.
Mm-hmm.
One of the couples had seen a song, and he had to tap the song on the wall, and the other person should guess what song it was, right?
Wow.
And there were fairly easy songs, right? But the other person couldn't get it, right? And the other one that was tapping got mad because how can you not get the song, right? But he forgot that he was just hearing the melody in its mind while he was tapping, right? And the other one only heard tap, 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 tap. So people forget, and that's exactly what you say. If you don't have the tone of voice with the words, you don't know how to interpret it correctly.
Yeah, it's everything. I encourage people to be in the same room as much as they can. I mean, Zoom is great. You and I being in the same room is very difficult, but if you can't be on Zoom, or if you can't be in the same room, Zoom is second best thing, or Google Meets, or however you decide to do a video interview.
Yeah. So do you also in the Netherlands, I'm from the Netherlands. We have a lot of sayings over here.
Mm-hmm.
And I once written a blog about the sayings we're using that are actually limiting us, right? Just act normal, right? What does it mean, right?
Right.
Now, why can't I be myself? Why do I have to adjust myself to the other persons, right? Because what's normal?
Mm-hmm.
What's the definition of normal?
Yeah.
And we don't realize it actually, right? And you've also well, in the Netherlands, we have something that you shouldn't put your head out, you shouldn't stand out of the crowd, so to speak, right? Because your head will be cut off.
Mm-hmm.
There are all kinds of things that tend to limit ourselves, and we don't realize it until we become aware of it.
Yeah. And, Erwin, I dealt with some of that. We have in the law enforcement world, which I worked in for 20 years, there is what my older brother has described it, because he was in law enforcement as well. He got out of it to work in the private sector. He called it a pack mentality. And he said the pack is safest when they stay together. When somebody separates from the pack for whatever reason, maybe they're outrunning the pack, maybe they're ahead of the pack, the other members of the pack will start nipping at their heels until they fall back in line. The reason I share that story with you is I built this business for 8 years while still working at the police department. So I got up at 4 a.m. every morning. I didn't have to be at work till 7:30. I was working at home for a couple hours. I was scheduling posts. I was booking speaking gigs. I was doing all the travel arrangements. And then I would go to the police department and work. Well, when I started becoming successful in my side job, speaking, it made a couple of officers uncomfortable. And one of them, I don't know who, wrote an anonymous letter to all of the powers that be in our city and said that Scott is building his business while he works at the police department, and he's doing all this posting and everything, which I was scheduling that morning because I was scheduling posts, I was scheduling emails to go out, that kind of stuff. And they wanted me investigated. And I believe it's because I was separating myself from the pack. I was moving towards my next gig while still working full-time for this one. And I highly recommend, I'm a huge fan of the side hustle, the side gig. I think everybody should have some kind of a side gig because it does give you something to work towards. And I didn't love that part of law enforcement. The whole you're out of line, and so we're going to put you back in your place. And I don't think that's an everywhere thing, and I don't think it's exclusive to law enforcement, but it is something that we do see in unhealthy work environments.
Oh yeah, but it's also explainable, right? Because if you look at your subconscious, right, it wants to protect you, wants to keep you safe, it wants to take care of you, and the easiest way to succeed in that is to keep you in your comfort zone, right? And the moment you are starting a new journey, which is unknown, right? You get out of your comfort zone, and you might get some pushback from your subconscious mind, right? Because it wants to get you back in your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're growing as a person, you're also getting out of the comfort zone of others, right?
Mm.
They're seeing a new Scott, a successful Scott, and they don't like that. They want to keep the status quo. So they're trying to pull you back so they feel safe as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I had read about a study one time, Erwin, where they and you may have talked about this on your podcast before. I don't know. They put a bunch of monkeys in a room. They put bananas up on a pole, and every time they tried to climb for the bananas, they squirt them off with a fire hose. One by one, they replaced the monkeys until a bunch of monkeys that were in there had never seen the fire hose, but they would keep each other from climbing because the rumor is you can't reach those bananas without getting shot off the pole with a fire hose. And I think
Exactly.
we pull each other back down all the time because it's not safe, or there could be some bad things we don't understand if you go after that prize, whatever that is. And it's I'd like to say we're a lot smarter than monkeys, but sometimes I question that.
Yeah. Well, we're habitual people, right? And if something nibbles on our habits, then we don't like it and we want to return to the old situation.
Yeah, for sure. And you bring up the brain. The brain has to be right, has to prove itself right. I coached volleyball for 5 years on the high school level, and I would tell those girls, when they hit a ball into the net, if that's what they think about for the next shot, they're going to hit the ball into the net because the brain has to prove itself right.
Yeah.
If they think about the times they were successful, their chances of success go way up. We can rehearse the failure or we can rehearse the success, and we can bring both of those to fruition because the brain is that powerful. It's fascinating to me.
Oh, definitely. It's all about focus, right? If something gets you focused, you will find proof of it. And the proof only strengthens the belief you have. And you got in this visual circle that if nobody helps you, you can't get out of it.
Yeah. It's amazing what the brain can do to help or hurt us.
Yeah. So returning to your book, Silence Kills.
Mm-hmm.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because it doesn't kill literally, but
Right. So the subtitle, Silence Kills, the subtitle is Communication Tactics to Speak with Confidence and Build Your Influence. And the reason I wrote this book is I saw too many organizations. And when I say organizations, I mean people, because people make up organizations. But I use the generic organizations. I saw too many organizations when things were bad, especially in a crisis, they would shut down communication. Maybe a product failed. Maybe they had a serious HR issue. They had an employee who was in a bad spot or whatever, and they just shut down communication. And I believe that's in a misguided effort to try to not say the wrong thing. Because in 2023, we live in a cancel culture world where if you say the wrong thing, you offend the wrong people, we're going to shut you down, deplatform you, boycott you, all of those things that are happening today. And I think that in a misguided effort to not say the wrong thing, organizations were shutting down communication. But what I learned in the police world is when the media showed up, for example, it was my job to talk to them. If I didn't give them the story, they would get the story from somebody else. Because my silence doesn't kill the story. I just lose control of the story at that point. Yeah. So if they roll up and I say no comment, or back in the corporate world, if there's an HR issue and employees are looking at me and I'm like, I can't talk about it, then their imagination will fill in a narrative that's potentially more damaging than what actually happened.
Yeah.
And I know there's lawyers out there listening to this that are saying, well, some things you can't talk about. You can at least say, if it's an HR issue, you can at least say, we know there's an issue going on. We're aware of it. We're working to a solution because we want this to be the best place you've ever worked.
Exactly.
And that tells my team, listen, they're aware. They may not be able to talk about it, but I know they're working on it. And that's all they really want. I mean, there's a part of us that wants the juicy, gossipy details, but the safety part of our brain needs to know that you're aware, you're not okay with it, and you're working towards a solution. So this book is giving people the tools they need to have uncomfortable conversations. Because I've never had an uncomfortable conversation that didn't start out awkward, but led to awesome. Because we push through to try to find a solution to whatever the problem is. and we give each other permission to maybe say the wrong thing in order to get to the right conclusion and not shut down our listening ears because we're offended. All of those things are important today. And silence, in my opinion, communicates apathy almost every time. If you are silent, it just feels like you don't care. And it's so much easier to correct a misspeak than it is to undo the damage of prolonged silence. Does that make sense?
Definitely makes perfect sense, Scott. And indeed, it's also, I also believe it's the basis of great relationships, right? Communication.
Yes.
Because it's what you said, if you don't communicate, then imagination takes over, and you know where that can lead, right?
Yeah. For sure. My wife and I had taught at our police academy before. They do a family night, and we've gone in and talked about, hey, this is how you do this job as a married couple, because policing, unfortunately, has a very high divorce rate. There's some people who think it's the job. I personally think policing attracts people who are more likely to get a divorce. May or may not be the job, but I don't know. But we would talk to them. We would tell them, when you come home from your day, if you're in a really good mood or a really bad mood, the cool thing is to say, well, I leave that at the office. You really can't, because the person who loves you and knows you the best knows when something's up.
Yeah.
And if you don't kind of just say a couple of sentences to say, tough day, dealt with a child abuse case or something like that, to let them know why you are acting the way you are, it's going to do damage to the relationship. And I don't care how tough you think you are, you can't put a lid on some of this trauma and just stick it on the shelf, because it'll start leaking. It'll start poisoning the rest of your brain. You've got to be talking to somebody about this stuff. Silence will kill a job. It'll kill a relationship. It'll kill a lot of things if it's left unchecked. Now, that being said, my wife and I have been married for 26 years. And so we can be on a road trip and we can spend an hour or more in the car, and neither one of us is talking, and the other one isn't concerned that person's mad, because we have thousands of hours of communication and a relationship that supports that kind of silence.
Yeah.
I about guarantee you nobody in your workplace has that kind of relationship with you. And so if you think, should I say something or should I not, err on the side of communication.
Yeah, definitely. Because you don't want imagination to take over, right? And a lot of, it's not only imagination, but it's also assuming things, right? And if you don't check the facts, then the greatest misfits can happen.
For sure. And you will, once you start assuming, going back to the brain here, if I assume, let's say my boss isn't talking to me, he's not talking about this issue that's going on at work, then my brain will start filling in a narrative that maybe I'm getting ready to be fired. Maybe my boss doesn't like me, doesn't respect me. And so I will look for all of those things that make that true.
Yeah.
And then I will start what they call quietly quitting. I will start looking at my resume. I'll start finding a new place. And maybe my boss is just preoccupied with a personnel issue in another department. It has nothing to do with me. But because I believe that, confirmation bias kicks in, and everything is brought to me filtered through that lens of I'm getting ready to be fired or repositioned, reassigned, something like that. And so when we start assuming motivation is when we really start doing damage to ourselves and our relationships. And as the supervisor, understand that if I'm silent with them, they're already filling in that narrative, and I may not be able to undo that damage.
Yeah, exactly. And it also actually kind of hit me as well that I'm now an entrepreneur for 8 years, and I don't like doing webinars because it's one-way communication most of the times, right? We're not having an interaction like we're having right now. And I think that's the part that I don't like about it, that there's no way of getting feedback and adapting to the situation. So communicating is definitely key, and assumption that's worse, right? Even if when I'm giving a training, I always say, if you have any question, doesn't matter what, just ask, right? Because there's no such thing as stupid questions. There are more than enough stupid answers, but there are no such thing as stupid questions, because something that's obvious for me might be sound like a foreign language for you, right? And if you don't understand it, just ask, and I'll try my best. I do my best to explain it in a way that you'll understand it as well.
Yeah. And when I was in the classroom teaching students, teaching them to make better choices, 5th and 7th graders, I got an opportunity, part of my career, to train officers to go and do that. So teaching police officers how to go in the classrooms, connect with students and teach them. And I would always tell them, when you ask a question of the class, if you get very little response or no response back, it's probably because you asked a bad question. You need to replay in your brain what you said and find a more clear way of saying it. To your point, you may not have brought it down to their level where it was a question they felt comfortable asking or answering. Yeah. So you kind of replay it. And there was more than one occasion I would look at the class because I wasn't getting a response. I would say, that was a terrible question. That's on me. Let me ask it a different way. And when you ask it a different way, they realize they're not dumb. You just didn't ask a coherent question, and that's on you. So from a supervisor standpoint, if you're not getting responses to your questions, it might be you asked a bad question.
Yeah. Yeah, it totally fits in an NLP quote I use a lot, which is the feedback you get is a result of your behavior. Mm-hmm. Which actually means that if you're not getting the feedback you're looking for, you have to change your own behavior.
Yeah.
So just what you said, if you're asking a question and you're not getting any response, change your behavior, change the question until you get the feedback you're looking for.
Yeah. And the best way in an organization, in my opinion, the best way to lead is to ask good questions. There's a misconception out there that, from a negotiation standpoint, when we would have officers apply to be a hostage negotiator, because we had a team of people that did this because you're on call and you had to rotate that. So when we had officers apply, sometimes they would go through the application process. They would say things like, well, I'm a really good talker. Okay, but that doesn't mean you're going to be an effective negotiator, because I don't know about you, Erwin, but I have never talked somebody into doing something. But I have listened somebody into doing something because I've asked appropriate questions. I've gotten to know them. I've built rapport. I know what their motivations are. I know what's important to them. What do they value? And if I can craft an outcome to their situation that checks as many of their internal boxes as possible, they're going to choose that path. Yeah. Because it allows them to step into who they are. It allows them to be successful. And so as a supervisor, I don't feel like the best supervisor is the person who's a good talker. I think the best supervisor is the person who's a good listener, asks really good questions, and gives people the time to respond. Because the more we know about our team, the more we can play to their strengths, the more we can put them in places they're most comfortable and most likely to be successful. And the more likely they're going to admit to us when they're kind of out of their depth. When they're going to say, I thought I could do this. I'm saying, cool, let's step in, figure out how we can fix this. I just think that you get there by listening, not by talking.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. And I always say also that the best question starts with what or how, right? Because then you put the other person into action, right? They can't answer with a yes or no. They just have to fill in the gaps. And what you said, if you can lead them to a certain situation, the most perfect solution is when you ask a question and they come up with that solution themselves.
Yes, because then it's theirs. It may have been what you wanted all along, and you may have steered them there, but when it's theirs, they'll own it and they'll step into it without you really having to say anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So it's good to be silent, but when you're silent, you have to listen.
You do have to listen. And I think there is a time where silence is appropriate. It can be used in the short term. It can't be our default, and it can't be our long-term plan. Sometimes when you ask a question of somebody, silence is uncomfortable for both people in the conversation. And so when you ask the question, if you see them thinking, which is why being able to see their body language is important. If you see them thinking, be silent and give them time. Yeah. Because they're thinking, and anything you say after that is going to derail that thought process. So you want them to think about this. And if they're an internal processor, like my wife is, they might think for a long while before they come back with one or two sentences that is the essence of everything they've been thinking about. If they're an external processor like me, when you ask them a question, the first 3 or 4 sentences, probably nothing to do with the question you asked. It's just how we start the thinking process. And if we're listening to respond, then we may latch on to those first 2 or 3 sentences and miss the whole point of what they're talking about. And we start trying to solve or rebut those first 2 sentences, and we've not even gotten to the core of their issues. So I think we have to ask good questions. We have to allow listening time. Now, if you're in the same room or you're on Zoom and you ask a question and they have a blank look, you can probably feel that silence. But if they're genuinely thinking, then just give them time to think. They'll start filling that silence. And when they finish talking, give a second or 2 of silence to see if they have anything else to add. You'd be surprised what people will say to clarify what they've already said if you're not jumping in right away with a response.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I love everything what you're saying, Scott, and there's a lot of value in that. So do you apply all the things with your kids as well? Language patterns, stuff like that?
I have tried. I will tell you, nobody does this perfectly. And there are for sure times that I mess up. I think one of the things my kids taught me the most is, the power of the timeout. I don't know if where you live, if you give kids timeout or whatever, you send them to their room for a time or whatever. That's something that we do here in the States sometimes. And when I was a kid, I thought that was a punishment. Because in my room as a kid, there was a window and a bed. That was about it. There was no stereo. There was no internet. There was no computer, nothing. Like it was a prison cell, basically, with a window. And so I thought it was a huge punishment. As a dad now of 2 grown daughters, I used timeouts because I had gotten emotional. They had done something that had caused an emotion in me that if I didn't send them to their room, I might say or do something that could be hurtful to them or damaging to our relationship. So sending them to their room was the safest thing for me to do. And it really wasn't a punishment. It was so that I could settle myself back down. Now, how does this translate to the working world? You're in a meeting, you're in a conversation with somebody, and you feel yourself getting really upset, really aggravated, really stressed out. When that meeting is over, the person who comes up to you right afterwards and wants to have the meeting after the meeting, the meeting where we gossip about everybody that was in the meeting, where we rehash all that other stuff. You say, I do want to talk about this. Give me 15 minutes. And then you go take a walk. You go read 10 minutes of a book. You go listen to 10 minutes of music, something to bring your blood pressure back down. Because when emotions are high, logic and reason are low every time. Under high emotion, we will say and do things that don't logically make sense. So the best way to have a better conversation is to allow that emotion to come back down. And time is the best chance of that happening. And there's been more than one time out when my kids were little where I went to their room and I apologized. And I said, I got upset because of what happened at work today. It wasn't because of what you did. And I'm going to do better next time. Because I didn't see that during the emotion. It was only after 10, 15 minutes of just settling down that I realized I was the one that was in the wrong, not them. And we can do that at work too. Like I got really upset in that meeting and now I owe you an apology. That goes a long way. And that doesn't happen in that immediate meeting after a meeting.
Oh, no, definitely not.
Timeouts are for the emotion side of things more than a punishment.
Exactly. And when you explain it, they understand it as well.
Yeah. And you don't, in the working world, I wouldn't give too much of an explanation. I do want to talk about this, or somebody comes in and hits you with something out of the blue you weren't expecting. It's upsetting, whatever. You're like, can you give me 15 minutes to think about this? I do want to address this. I do want to talk about this. You're validating the fact that they brought it to you, even though they caught you off guard. Yeah. You're validating, there's probably some value here. Give me 15 minutes and then I'll come and find you and we'll talk about this. You'll have a much better conversation. And as a speaker, I speak on stages all over the place, and I do corporate events and stuff. And I have people that sometimes will come up to me and disagree with what I say, right? And I want to get defensive right away. But John Acuff, who's a speaker and author friend of mine, he has a response that I've actually started using. I just tell him, you know what, you may be right. I'm not admitting anything to them, but I'm also not making myself defensive. They come up to me and say, you know, that thing you said, it's wrong because of XYZ. You know what, you may be right. And then later on, when I think about what they said, because maybe there's useful information in their critique, maybe not. Maybe it just needs to be dismissed and I don't need to have an argument with somebody at an event.
Yeah.
But when I say, you know what, you may be right, it validates them. And then I don't feel the need to defend myself.
Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful tactic.
Yeah, I love it because it's not dismissive of them either. It affirms that they brought that to your attention, because I think sometimes we see criticism as an attack. And maybe it's just somebody trying to make us better who doesn't know an appropriate way to do that.
Yeah.
So if we think about it and let the emotions settle down, there may be something of value in what they said. There may not be, but that's not going to be apparent right in the moment.
Exactly. Right. And all you can do is learn from it, right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So for most people, public speaking is like one of the biggest fears.
Mm-hmm.
How was that for you? Did you ever had a problem with speaking in public, or was it easy for you?
It's always been something that I can remember enjoying doing. Even as a teenager, if I had an assignment in class, like there was some nerves to it. I still get nervous today. I've done thousands of presentations. I still get nervous, but Michael Hyatt always says it's not nerves, it's my body preparing for peak performance. Yeah. It's the adrenaline you need to get through that thing. And it's your body preparing for peak performance. I think for me today, it's the most fun I can have. I love being on a stage. I love communicating. It's an endorphin rush. It's all the good things. I don't love the booking and the travel and the billing and all the communication with the clients, but that's what gets me to that hour to 90 minutes of playtime, because that's generally playtime for me. And I know what I'm going to say, but I love interacting with the audience and finding out, they've got this concept, it's time to move on, or we need to spend more time here, or this joke landed really well, which means this next joke is going to be even better because I've already connected with them. So to me, it's an art form. It's not a science. And it's, if I can get them laughing in the first 10 minutes of the presentation, I know they're emotionally connected with me, and I know I can bring them to a point where they're going to remember the stuff we talked about. And I don't apologize. Some things in my presentation are upsetting for people. It makes them a little bit sad because it reminds them of why communication is important. And they'll come up to me afterwards and they'll say, that really made me sad. I'm like, well, me too. And I don't apologize for that, because you'll remember that, because I tied it to an emotion. Yeah. This is, if we want, the things we remember the longest in our lives are tied to a powerful emotion. So if I can get the concepts I'm teaching them and tie them to an emotion, or tie it to a picture of something they see every day, they'll remember it longer. Because if I feel these tactics are useful, I can't afford for you to forget them, because there's too much hanging in the balance. It could be a relationship with a loved one that's hinged upon your ability to communicate effectively. So the longer I can get you to remember these tactics, the more successful you'll be.
Yeah, wonderful. So talking about memories and emotions, if you could come up with one memory, what has been your biggest, either your own biggest breakthrough or a breakthrough you've achieved with a client of yours?
Wow. For me, I think I'm most alive when I'm on stage. Now, I do a podcast, I wrote a book, I do a mastermind, I do all of these things because I feel like I give value there. But all of those things are geared towards getting me in front of a group of people to speak. Mm-hmm. The book, I'm not trying to get on a New York Times bestseller list. I'm not trying to do any of that. I'm trying to get more speaking engagements. And so the book becomes kind of a business card that people don't throw away. Yeah. When I talk to an HR manager about the possibility of me coming to their organization to speak, I'll send them a copy of my book for free. And my wife, when I first started doing that, she was like, they're not going to read that. They're busy people. They got a lot going on. I said, they don't have to. it'll sit on their desk or it'll sit on a bookshelf right behind their desk. And when somebody walks in and says, we're having communication issues, they're like, I know a guy. And they'll grab the book and they might contact me and bring me in to speak. So to me, the book is the breakthrough that I've learned in the last year is the book is a business card that people won't throw away. And I think a lot of people feel like, well, I could write a book. I have a book in me. And I would encourage you to write that book, to get it out there, because when I go to a conference and I get people's business cards, now I'm different. I email them right away so that we've started a relationship. I start the conversation with them, but then I throw their business card away. And if they don't email me back, that conversation is dead.
Yeah.
But if you give me a book, it'll sit on my to read pile until I get to it. And I will constantly remember that time we connected and that time you gave me a book. And you might be the person I call when I need you the most.
Yeah, wonderful. And that's actually very clever. And I have something similar. Like I have written an ebook, right, but not published it. But I have this little block note, right, with my Dutch company name on it. I got some little terms of my services on it, and I give it to some relationships I want to foster, right?
Yeah.
And those are actually like 50 business cards. And they're using it. And each time they take notes, they see my name, they see the services I provide.
Yep.
And that's how you get stay top of mind.
Yeah. And we have newsletters that we send out and that kind of stuff. And I know people don't open my newsletter, but I don't worry about that because they've not unsubscribed. They're seeing my name come across their email inbox. Even though they hit delete, they've not unsubscribed. And so when they have a communication issue, in the back of their mind is going to be Scott Harvey. And they'll be like, you know what? I know a guy who can help us with this. So it's frustrating sometimes to think people won't read my book or read my newsletter or whatever. Send it anyways. Keep sending it and even if they do unsubscribe, then I'm not their person. And that's okay. I have a limited number of subscribers I can have anyways. If you self-select out, good on you. That saves me money because you're not my person. And I would much rather have that spot for somebody who is my person, even if they don't open my email.
Yeah, makes total sense, Scott. So, Scott, I'm afraid that if I don't watch the time, we could spend hours on discussing these topics, right? Because I love everything what you're saying. And I'm also aware what the importance of language is, right? One of the quotes I love a lot is, we are not our behavior, right? That you can definitely use with children and the people that have children are listening, you should never say to your kid from you're stupid. No, you're doing stupid, right? You're doing it. You're not being it, right? And it's a big difference because it can last forever, right?
For sure.
And so things like that, and we have something as what we call rethinking, meaning if you have like a negative outcome, how can you reposition it to have it a positive thing? So I definitely love language and playing with it. I'm a hypnotherapist and we use a lot of language patterns as well. So I know the importance of what you can achieve with it. So it's wonderful. Yeah. And it's wonderful to hear you talk about it because you're very passionate about it. Not only about communication, but also about helping people communicate better and inspiring them as well.
Yeah, I love it. And I think, to get back to the pack mentality we talked about earlier, that started at the police department when they found out what I charged for a presentation. Because in their brain, it was, you get paid that an hour? That's an hour? No, that's 20 hours of experience that's allowed me to distill all of that stuff into a 1-hour presentation and package it in a way that you'll remember.
Yeah.
So that's what that is. And that's the power of language. And that's, to me, the art of being a professional speaker, is packaging all of the things you've learned over 20 years, condensing it to an hour where somebody doesn't have to live 20 years to learn what you've learned.
Exactly. Right. There's this story about the painter Picasso. right? I'm not sure if you heard of it, but it's a great story that he was sitting in the terrace having a drink, and a lady passes by and she recognizes the painter, right? So she asked him if he could draw a profile picture of her, right? And so he took a little piece of paper and he drew it. It was like 15 minutes, right? And she asked her, "Oh, it's wonderful. Can I have it?" And he said, "Well, sure, you can buy it from me, right? For 10,000 euros." Well, back then we hadn't that euros yet, but and then, but she would ask, "Are you crazy? Right? It just took you 15 minutes to draw it. Why should I pay you 10,000 for it?" And he said, "Well, it didn't take me 15 minutes. It took me 50 years to get to the level that I would be able to do this in 15 minutes."
Right.
And that's actually what you said, right? You're not charging it for the hour. You're charging for the experience that's combined in that hour of wisdom that will stay with them for their life.
And there are some people in the speaking world, and I'm not talking bad about them, Erwin, but I know people who will go and do an 8-hour full day presentation. I'm not that guy. I'm going to condense everything I've learned into a 90-minute presentation because everybody's busy. And if you as a corporate executive are paying for a solution to your problems, do you want an 8-hour solution or do you want a 90-minute solution? Because if I can come and train your team in 90 minutes and then everybody goes back to work for the rest of the day, that's money you're reclaiming.
Yeah.
And I would much rather do it in 90 minutes than a full day or two of training. And there are some people who are very effective at that business model. I'm not that guy. My book is 160 pages. It's 38,000 words, which is a pretty small book, but it's very approachable. And it's something you can keep on a shelf and refer to whenever you have an issue, because I want it to be very usable and not something that turns people away before they even pick it up. It's very approachable.
Yeah, wonderful. So, Scott, if you could share, well, of course, you already shared a lot, right?
Yeah.
But if there's one little tip or piece of wisdom about following your passion or entrepreneurship or whatever, or maybe even communication with the audience to inspire them, what would it be?
I would tell people, follow your passion is something that I feel very strongly about, because speaking is my passion, and law enforcement, which I enjoyed for 20 years, gave me the stories I needed to be a good speaker. That wasn't necessarily what I planned on doing when I started police work, but that's where my life ended up. And I would tell people to find that thing that you would do for free and start doing it for free, even when you have the full-time job. I don't care if that's accounting or painting or mowing lawns or babysitting children, whatever. That thing that brings you a ton of joy, that when you're doing it, you lose time, the time just gets away from you. And then develop that skill to a point where people will pay you for it. And that's kind of what I did with speaking. I started out doing free gigs at conferences I was already attending. I was just filling in as a breakout speaker. And then that turned into paid gigs, which turned into more. And the more reps you get, the more the snowball rolls over, the more snow it picks up. And before you know it, somebody's paying you well to do something that is so fun, you feel bad cashing the check.
Yeah.
The check, like I said, is to pay me for all my time spent booking and emailing and traveling and all that stuff. It was not for the 90 minutes on stage.
Oh, no, definitely not. No, I totally get what you're saying. Wonderful. So, Scott, if people want to know more about you or get in touch with you or maybe book you or buy your book, how can they do that?
So you can go to speakingofharvey.com. That is the main mothership. That's got all my social media channels on it. That's got, how to get a hold of me. There's a contact Scott button on there. I'm pretty easy to find on social media. If you want to watch like a promo video for the book, silencekillsbook.com has a promo video and tell you a little bit more in depth about the book. It's available on Amazon. And if you go into your local bookstore and it's not there, you can ask them to order it and they'll get it sent there. I just found out a guy in Helsinki, Finland contacted me and said he bought it at a bookstore there in Helsinki. So didn't know it was over there. So that's kind of cool. But it's on Amazon as well. So
perfect. Well, Scott, thanks for your time. Thank you for being a guest of mine. It was very inspirational. And I love to stay in touch with you.
Thank you for sharing your platform with me, Erwin.
I hope you liked this episode. Make sure to check out the other episodes, because each one is filled with interesting and inspiring stories and energy. Are you following your passion as well and make a good living out of it? Contact me and you could be my next guest. Would you like to follow your passion but are not there yet? Check out my website millionairelifestrategy.com and book an appointment to discover what I could do for you. Don't forget to share the podcast with your friends so that they get inspired as well.